today's FileMaker meeting is using the Data API script step, the Execute FileMaker Data API. And this script step was introduced in FileMaker 19, and it was kind of a surprise because it's actually not in the documentation at all. If you do what's new in FileMaker, that part near the top, it's not there. If you look up the script steps, it's not in the script steps. So there's no documentation on it in the FileMaker Pro help. There is documentation on the Data API, and it actually uses the same calls pretty much as a Data API. So if you're not sure how to use something, you can look at the Data API documentation, which is here at this link. What it does is it uses the FileMaker Data API engine. So when you call this script step, you're not calling the Data API, you're just calling the Data API engine that's inside of FileMaker. And a lot of people are comparing it to Execute SQL. So you have Execute Data API script step, Execute SQL script step, and people are asking how they compare. Wim DeCourt, it's line, he's done a lot of testing with this, and it seems like the SQL is faster than the Data API. And I don't know if that's because one engine is faster than the other, but I think it has something to do with when you do an SQL query, what you're asking for in return is really small. Like you can ask for just one field, and it's just a list of one field. The Data API returns a lot of JSON pretty much every time. And so I think it's just because it's verbose like that it's slower. And the second thing I say is the SQL caches. And I don't know if it's so much at caches, but SQLs will, I think they're doing an indexing. So I don't know if you've noticed if you do a Execute SQL query, and it might take a few minutes, and you run the same query again, it goes really fast. I think it's kind of did an index the first time it's using that. The Data API will take pretty much the same each time. It might be a slightly faster the second time, but you don't gain much. The Execute SQL is context insensitive. You can run that from anywhere and ask for anything. You can even create relationships on the fly. You can create joins, all kinds of joins, and do all kinds of things like that. The Execute Data API, you can run that from anywhere, but when you run it, you're asking for a layout. And so then you're kind of using the context of that layout for what you get returned. So once you've specified the layout that you want to run it from, then you are limited to the fields on that layout, and the fields on the layout are limited to what they can see through the relationship graph. The Execute SQL does have one disadvantage, that if the user who runs it has an open record, it will be very slow. That can be solved with just making sure you commit before, but if they have multiple windows open, it might be a problem. So that's one thing that could make the SQL slower. So how does the Execute Data API script step work? Well, there are two kinds of queries you can run. One is a data query, and one is a metadata query. When you run it, it actually opens, this is what I've read, is it opens a new window which opens and closes really fast. So it runs in a window that you don't even see. It works internally on the file you are using. So it's not calling the Data API, it's just calling the Data API engine from inside FileMaker. And the file can be hosted or local, so you don't even need the server. All the things I'm going to show you, I'm doing on a local file on my machine. I'm not even using the server. So it's not using the Data API, so the fourth point there, it doesn't need the REST FM REST extended privilege set. So you don't need that, no special privileges. Just run it like a script step. Can somebody mute themselves? Yeah.
I got you, Phil.
Okay. The Data API, when you call that, it can do all kinds of calls. It can read and write and delete and edit. The Data API script step only does reads. So you're only going to bring back information that you're finding. It's not going to change anything. Okay, so how does it work? We'll show you the script step, but basically when you do the script step, you do three settings. You do a select where you can check or uncheck, and that's saying whether you're going to replace all the contents or append what's already there. Usually you're just going to fill the whole thing, and you're going to select and just fill it in from fully. You're going to select the target. That's where you want the results to go through, where you want the results to go to. The target can be a variable or it can be a field, just like a lot of other places where you select a target. And then the third part is the query, and that's where you build the query that you're going to request of the data API. The data queries are pointed at a layout, and they return all the field data on that layout, including portal data. So this is another thing that we need to kind of solve if we're going to use this. Do we make a new layout for each one of our queries? Because if you want to do a query that you only want to see the data get JSON back for 3 fields, you can make a layout with those 3 fields, you're fine. But if you have multiple queries and you have a query for 5 fields or 3 fields and 2 fields, should you just do one layout or should you start making new layouts for all of these? And that's kind of a question you need to solve for yourself. What's the most efficient? The metadata queries, you can do tables, layouts, or fields, and you can also do scripts. Although I couldn't get the scripts to work when I tried it myself, but according to the the documentation on the data API, it does say you can do scripts. And so you can query tables and get a list of all the tables, or you can query a specific table and it tells you all the fields in that table. And same for the layouts. You can query a list of layouts or a specific layout. What do you get back when you run this? Well, the results are returned in JSON, of course. If you have an error when you run it, you will get an error code. You'll just get back an error code and an error message. You only see one of those. So if you did something that had multiple errors, it's just going to give you the first one. And the data API documentation just lists like 4 or 5 errors. So I'm not sure how many different errors you will get back. If your query is successful, you get back a pretty good chunk of JSON, depending on what kind of query you made. So there's data info, which is information on what was returned, like it's going to tell you how many records, it's going to tell you the found count, the total count of that table. It's going to tell you how many you did from that found count, because you can have an offset, which is just a subset of those records. So that comes in the data info. You get the data itself, which is presented in JSON. So you're going to get a JSON set for each record of all the fields in that layout. And if they're portals, you're going to get sub-JSON sets, elements inside of that, which are going to have all the portal data. So if you have 2 records, you're going to get a set of JSON, 1 set of JSON, and if there's a portal with 2 child records, you're going to get 2 sets of JSON inside of that, and then the second record with the same thing. And there's also the messages. You get the messages back when it's successful, which is a code 0 and a message OK. For the metadata queries, when you query all those when you query the tables or the layouts, then you just get a list of either, it's a much smaller list of the layouts or the tables, or what's on the layout or what's in the tables. So what do the queries look like? So these are queries of just data queries. And so like I said, you have to tell it a layout that you want to use that's going to set your context. And you can pick any layout in your file. And it has to be in your file, though. If you want to do a Execute Data API on a different file, you have to actually set it up in the other file and then call the script from your file, call the script in the other file to run it from there. You can't run this against another file. So you're going to call a layout in your database. You're going to tell it a limit, and this is any limit you want of how many you want to be returned. The offset is where it starts. So you can have an offset of 1, or you can start at record 100 if you want. This is something that's pretty funny. It's the layout response. And a lot of people aren't sure what this is, but I was told that you can query one layout, but have the response come from a different layout. Although I don't know why you would do that. And so most people are just kind of ignoring the layout response and just leaving it blank. So I'm not really sure what use it serves here. And then the query is just a simple little JSON query. So I want, it's like a find in FileMaker. In the same way using the data API. So you're doing the find. So in this example here, I'm doing a search for anybody whose first name is Ben or contains first name Ben and lives in Illinois. And so that's the example of an AND find. If you wanted to do this as an OR, so on the right here, you can see it as an OR, where I'm going to query anybody whose name is Ben or anybody who lives in Illinois. So I do 2 separate JSON elements instead of one. You can do these with omits too. So in this query, I'm looking for anybody whose first name is Ben, but they don't live in Illinois. So I do a second element with the omit, just like a new record request and a find. Does anybody have any questions? Anything yet? Okay.
Nope, there's no questions yet.
Okay. You can also have the data sorted when it comes back. So this is, for example, my first find. Let's find anybody named Ben in Illinois. And I want to sort it by the state and the city. So it's, well, they're all in Illinois, so that doesn't necessarily make sense for this one, but this would sort it by the state and then the city within the state, ascending both times. The metadata queries are much simpler. So you just have your action, which is metadata, and you have and then the second part is telling you what part of the metadata you want to query. So in this case, I'm going to query this layout contact load JSON, and it's going to return all of the fields on that layout and all the characteristics of those fields. If they have a value list, if they're like what kind of field they are, what their ID is, what the field name is. Just I can show you that, but it just gives you all the information about the fields on that layout. And you can do it for if you do tables and then just empty double quotes, it's going to give you a list of all the tables in your file. And then if you do a table with a certain name, it's going to give you all the fields in that table. Okay, so I think it's demo time. So let me show you how we can use this. And I'm going to start off with the demo of the data queries, and then I'll do one on the metadata. Okay, so this is a database that comes from Soliant. Where's my mouse? Okay, so it's test data generator, and Mislav Kos from Soliant put this out like 5 years ago, and it's a way where you can just make a whole bunch of names. I'm not showing any right now, but it comes with just one record, but then you can use these buttons to make more. And I put 100,000 names in here. It just randomly generates names, addresses, city, states. So these are just completely randomly generated. So I made these 100,000 records and decided to see and what I wanted to do was take the data from here, which is, a list of names, and then put them in data tables. And so remember how I said it's going to return the fields it's going to return the fields that you want. So I picked these 6 fields that I marked red: first name, last name, phone, city, state, and company. And I said, okay, I want those to be my data tables fields. And then what I did is I made another layout with just those 6 fields on it. And so when I do my query, I'm going to look to this layout and get the information back for these 6. So let's run this through a few times, and I'll show you how you can use the Execute Data API to make this a lot faster. So here I'm going to have how many records to process, and I'll just do 1,000 at first. And this is with the standard method. And this is just find my records. So I just go and do the first 1,000 records. And then I don't do find, I just set the limit at 1,000. So I'm going to loop through for 1,000 times. And I'm going to create my JSON. And here's a copy of the script. I can show it to you. So here's the script. I just set some variables. I like to do this. I set this is a JSON element. I set it blank. And this is going to be JSON array. And I initialize it with empty brackets. I'm doing a start time to see how long it takes. I'm going to say how many records. That's the field on the layout. How many records I'm going to use. And I start a counter at 0. And so then I go through the records and then I set each JSON element. So I'm going to set a JSON element for that record. I'm going to set an element with the name first, name last, phone, address, city, state. And then what I would usually do is do this one that's grayed out here. I would go ahead and take that element, put it in the array, and then keep adding each one to the array as I loop through. But we found out that it actually works a lot faster if you do it this way, where you put those elements in a list. You can build it faster. It just, FileMaker handles that faster. When it's building an array, especially as it gets big, it gets slower and slower as you keep piling that variable with more elements. But if you just put it in a list, it goes pretty fast. And so I'm going to loop through this and keep making that list. And then after I'm done, I take the list and all I do is substitute out the returns for a comma. And then I put a square bracket on the front, put a square bracket on the end, and I've got a JSON array. And like I said, we found that to be a lot faster. So you saw that. You saw that with 1,000 records, it took a quarter of a second, 235 milliseconds. If I do 5,000, you'll see it gets slower, but not too much. So that took 1.4 seconds to do 5,000 records. And to fill this, and I don't want to go too deep in this, but I'm using carafe, the data tables from carafe, which made it real easy. So in the script, I'm calling carafe down here, but I'm just loading all of these elements. This comment shows you what I'm loading them with. Here's where I actually set the values. And when I send those to carafe, it builds the data tables for me. It was really simple to set up, takes a few minutes, but there's lots of videos on that if you want to go look at Soliant on YouTube. Okay, so that's the first way, and that's the way we do it before. So you saw us get to 1.4 seconds. I did this all the way up to 100,000 records, and it took a number of minutes to do that. So as you do more and more, it gets slower and slower. So the second way is to do data tables with a loop. And this is the same kind of thing where I'm going to do, except I'm going to get the data using the Execute Data API script step. That's how I'm going to get my initial JSON. But here's kind of the problem with it. So that took longer. That took 0.68 seconds instead of a quarter second. It took almost 0.7 of a second. So it's slightly longer, but this is a kind of a small record set. So this is kind of what seemed to be a problem when I first started looking into this. This is this script step here. In this case, this is my call. I'm going to just, this is the layout I want. I'm going to use that global field. I'm going to say, okay, 1,000 records, start the first one. And I don't have the layout response. So that's part of it. And then, oh, and I'm not doing, and I don't have any other query because I'm not doing any certain find. I'm just going to take the first 1,000 records. I'm not doing any query or sorting or anything besides that. So I use that to call the data API. And then I come back, but I still got this JSON. And I think I can show that to you. It's not setting it. Let me fix that. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to save it so we can look at it in the viewer, data viewer. So let's run that again. Ran it slightly slower. So here's what comes back. This is 1,000 records. And to see it formatted, this is what was returned. So you see up here, here's the part I said messages. It just gives me a 0, okay. Then the response, there's the data part. This is my first element here. And this is an array. So this is an array of all of the 1,000 records. So each record, it returns this. And really all I want is this part. I just wanted the, of course, JSON, they're going to be alphabetical. So I wanted the first name, last name. I wanted the city, state, phone, company. So I just want those 6. But I get all this back anyway. So it tells me this is how many times it's been modified. There's no portal data, or this would be a bunch of elements inside of it. And this is the record ID itself. So I've got 1,000 of these records, all that data. And at the very bottom is the data info. So this is the database I was working on. This is my total found count, all 101,000. This is the layout I used. It returned 1,000. And the total record count is 1,000. So all the records were found, but I'm only using the first 1,000. And it gives me the table. So I get all this back. And I can't just feed that to data tables. I've got to do something with it. And so that's why I have this script. And basically what I did is I looped it the same way, but instead of looping through records and creating my array, I'm looping through this list. We found some ways to make it faster than it would be normally. So we take the JSON that came back in this data, and we made that into a list itself. And so the list is, we went down to the response.data, so the data part of it, and then we create a list of each of those. Each line is one of our records. And then we go through and we're just basically, to get the element, we just pull the value out of the list, which makes it faster. And then the same thing, we put that in another list, which is going to be an array, looping through. And then at the end, we add the square bracket in front, behind, put in returns where all the commas were, and we've got our array, our table data array to feed the data tables. So all that to say that, you know, using the standard looping method does it in that fast, and then doing kind of that work to process the data API JSON, you know, is even slower. And it doesn't get any better as you get more records. As you get more records, it's slower. It still gets slower and slower as I go up higher records. So when I was starting to look at this and learn about it, I had to talk with Wim. I said, what good is this? What are you going to use it for? If it, you know, you have to process all this JSON you get out of it, you could almost do an Execute SQL and maybe get the right, put in the right separators between the fields and between lines, between records, and get something that's easier to work with. And he said, that's true. But then he said, the way you really want to do it is you don't want to parse this JSON out in a loop. What you want to do is you want to parse the JSON you get back in a web viewer using JavaScript. So that's method 3. So I put a web viewer here, and what's in this web viewer is this, and this is my first JavaScript function I actually wrote myself, and I had a little help making it better, but it's, you can almost kind of read this. I'm just gonna take the input, and then I'm going to loop through it while my count is less than total. I'm just gonna go and keep pulling off the JSON pieces. And somebody helped me do this, so they use the push, and so that's gonna take each element and push it and build the array. So I'm going to do that all on the web viewer. And that brings up something else in FileMaker that came out in FileMaker 19. And Wim wrote a really good blog post on it in Java integration in 19. And so the point is, we've got a couple new things here where we can call a web viewer to run JavaScript, and then the JavaScript in the web viewer can call back to FileMaker. So we perform JavaScript in a web viewer. And then in that web viewer, we do something like, in my case, parse JSON. And then at the end, it calls back into FileMaker, and it sends the result back to FileMaker.
Shouldn't that say perform script?
Yeah, that should be yeah, there's a typo there. It's not perform, it's perform. So besides that typo, it works really well. It's a really good idea. And see, here's his script, and I kind of based mine on that. And he kept saying he was certain that JavaScript is made for this stuff. It can parse the JSON so fast. That's what it's made to do. So I wrote it so it would do this. So it's gonna, let me show you the script. It's 2 steps. So the first step, it just, same thing. I do my same Execute Data API call. And then I just send that to my web viewer using this. So that's the name of my web viewer. I'm calling the function inside of the web viewer, process JSON, and I'm sending it the data. And that's all, this script just does that, just does like those 3 things. And then the JSON is going to call back, and it's going to return, this parameter. And it's going to return, it's going to send a parameter to the script when it calls it from the JavaScript in the web viewer. So let me show you that. So if I do this on 1,000 records, it's 0.398. And so that's not much faster, but if I get to bigger numbers, it's still under a second for 10,000. If I do 50,000, it should take a couple seconds. And this is the kind of thing where the looping, it took 2.8 seconds to do 50,000 records. And it's like I said, it's sending it to here and then returning it back to FileMaker. And then I just put that in data tables. So even 100,000 records. Should take maybe 4 or 5.2 seconds. I did this with the other loops, and it was taking 7-10 minutes, maybe even more. It actually takes a while to draw the data tables where it's got 100,000. There's 100,000 lines of data tables. And it helps to paginate it, because without the pagination, it takes minutes to draw this in FileMaker. with the 100,000 all on one page. So that's why I added that. And then the last one is another Selenium person, Jeremiah Small, helped me with this part. And he was not very happy with my JavaScript. Like, this is not good JavaScript. So he came up with a way to do it much simpler without any kind of looping, and it uses this map function. And so what that does is it kind of just takes your JSON, all your JSON elements, and just puts them into an array. And it does it like, I don't know exactly how it works, but it does it better. And it's not much faster, but he assures me it's much more elegant. So the 100,000 with this method will probably come in just a few tenths of a second faster. Oh, it came out about the same, 5.3 seconds. So this is kind of the final one I finished with. So 100,000, that's all I have, is I only have 101,000 in here. So 100,000 rows I can put into my data tables in 5 seconds, which in, like I said, many, many minutes using the other methods. Are there any questions?
There have not been any questions. I could make some up if you want.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I can't think of any offhand.
Okay.
The JavaScript is great, though. Keep going.
Okay. So that's the way you can use the data queries. It's a great way to get your JavaScript, and if you can process it with another web viewer using JavaScript, I mean, it's a great way to get your JSON, and then if you process it with using JavaScript in a web viewer, you can process huge amounts of it very fast. And like I said, load this data tables in just a few seconds with many lines. But the other thing that we've talked about is using metadata queries. And I don't have an example to show you, but I took a bunch of screenshots where we use this, which is just ingenious. So I'm going to go walk through that. So this is a form that we had for a client that came to us in the spring, and they have like 500 or so of these forms, and they needed to redo it. I think both they wanted to upgrade FileMaker and they wanted to make them better on the web. And so this is a form that's in FileMaker, and it's literally like FileMaker fields underneath this, and they would kind of click through, and it would click through into FileMaker fields. And they need to redo this, and we were kind of wondering what's the best way to do it. We have to make 500 of these reports and rebuild 500 of these reports. So this is around the same time 19 came out, and we thought we could maybe use the metadata from 19 to help work this. So what we did is we came up with a way where each report is now based on 2 layouts. And so one layout, you'll see this one. You'll see this one is, this is the layout that is showing all the fields that need to be on the form. And they're all set up like they should be. Like if it's a yes, no radio button, or if it's a checkbox or a drop down. And so all the fields are set up on this layout, and it's paired with another layout. And on this other layout, it tells it what the parent is. So like this parent is a child find part B. And then with the person who makes these is taking all the fields and saying what kind of fields they are. So these are display only fields. So it's the field with its context. So demo entry, ethnicity. So this is a list of all the fields. This is just a text area. These are fields that have to break after them. And these are fields that are label only. So like these ones down here are label only. So that just provided us more data to send to the web. And so when you do metadata, you get something like this. You get your message, okay, code 0, message, okay, and the response. And here's the data. So it's telling you about each one of those fields. So it's saying, is it auto enters off? It's an edit text. It's a text edit field. And this comes with every field, whether it's a data or not. I'm not sure about that. It gives the name of the field. It says, what are those? Type of field. So it's giving you this data with each field. So what we did is we did a return. So we did a query on all the fields that you saw on this layout. So we did a query to give us information on all the fields on that layout. And then And then we used a script to go through and we added a few more values on our own that weren't given there. So if it's a label only field, remember those boxes where she put like which fields were label only, which fields were break after? So it checks each field as it loops through each field. In this case, looping's not bad because it's not like you can have 100,000 records. You're going to have a layout with maybe 50 field objects. So it's not bad to loop through 50 records. So we loop through them and we say, okay, also add the tag that it's a label only, is or isn't a label only, or is or isn't break after, text area, display only. And then this one was tricky. To do the form on the web, we needed to give it a label on the on the web. Every field has a label, like we have labels in our layouts, and that's not part of the data, and that's not easy to get. So what we did is we used the object name of that field. So on the actual layout itself, we named all the objects with what we wanted their label to be on the web. So it's just looping through all those and adding this data to the other metadata. And it's sending it to the web. And this is the one where you had to kind of be creative and do the object name. I'll show you there's a little bit more to that. To do the object name, go back one. I don't know if you can see, we have to do it in find mode. There's a reason, because it wouldn't go to the right field if we did it just in browse mode. If we went to find mode, it would pop to the first field we wanted to go to. And then down here, we go to field next. And we made sure the tab order matched the Z order. So email sent to is the first field, and that's the one we start on. And if you tab through the fields, you're going to tab through them in the same order as you work your way up through the Z, which is probably going to go like top to bottom. And so we know at each field, we check it and we say, okay, what was its object name? And then we add that, and that gives it object name for the web. And so when he gets it on the web, he has kind of a subset of the data. He has some of it that came from the metadata that was returned from the Execute Data API, the name of the field, if it's required. But then there were some that we added, the break after. Is it disabled? Disabled, like false, is a field that's going to be grayed out on the web. So they see the data, but they can't fill it in. Is it label only? And that's for like the headers on the layout. So it's not a field they're actually going to use. It just shows it as a header. So this is the JSON that he gets on the web. And this is the form it makes on the web. So like there was a section 1 field, and this is label only, so there's no data. These were ones that were disabled, so they're just grayed out. And these are ones that had a value list. So out of country, it said it's a value list with this checkbox Y. This part had a B or C radio button. And so what happens is, so it makes a form like this. So when the people go on, and if they click this child find part B, it's going to show them all the reports that are child find part B. If you look, that's like right here. So that would be one of these. So the beauty of this is that we wrote this process once for one form, but now the person there can make any form she wants, and all she needs to do is make this layout, or make this layout, make the other layout that goes with it. So make this layout, and say what the fields are, and she knows how to do this. And then as soon as she does that and she gives it a thing, then it'll show up on the web. We don't have to do anything to build the web form. And so she's going through and recreating all these forms by just making these 2 layouts and following kind of the rules for making the layouts. And it's really easy to test. So once she makes it and then she tests it, if there's something wrong, if a field's not appearing right, we don't need to really rewrite any code. She can just go to FileMaker and make a change on the layout and then try it again, and it'll come out on the web form the way we want it. Come out on the web form the way we want it. There was one kind of funny thing with value list. So you can also send a value list along with the layout and along with the fields, but the value lists were taking a really long time to load. So what we do is we send a list of all the value lists every night, because those are pretty static. So every night the web gets updated with a list of value lists. And so it says web ID, it calls them by ID, but actually it's using the name. So a few we send, yes, no, we send. Here's the display values. It displays yes or displays no, and that's the value YN. But all these ones you see that are just empty, that means that those are being stored on the web and refreshed every night. So it's looking for this value list called provider list. and then he gets the values from the web, and that's much faster than having to pull it out of here. And when I talked about the labels, so remember I said we use the object name. So that's like where these come from, ethnicity, child, middle name. That's what we're putting in the object name on the layout, and then adding it to the JSON. And then when it gets pulled to the web, it knows that this is the label and this is the field, and it's grayed out, and the data is filled in, but it's grayed out. Okay, so I want to thank a few people for helping with this. The part you just saw, that was done by Beth Bennett and Steve Bennett from Sline Consulting, and I think what they did there was just genius, working out the method to make those web forms from any layout. And Wim DeCourt also gave me a lot of help with the Data API. Jeremiah Small helped me with the JavaScript parsing. And Jeremy Brown wrote some really good blogs. I looked at a lot of blogs on this, and a lot of them didn't say much about what's really going on, but Jeremy wrote some good ones. So look at his. And here are the resources, the Data API guides here. This is Jeremy's blog. And the blog I showed you on the web viewer integration is here. And if you're interested in carafe, you can get it here.
Very cool. I had a question about container data. I'm not sure exactly exactly when they started doing container data. I know that when you export container data through the normal FileMaker Data API, they don't meter your usage for that. It's just the text-based data that comes out in a JSON block. So I started sending messages, like using it to send MMS messages from FileMaker 18 and 17. But I don't know what would happen if you did, you do an Execute Data API, and does it come up with a public URL for the container data like it does when you have a hosted file?
I don't know if it does data or container data, to be honest. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
I kind of think it doesn't do the container data. Because it just returns JSON. I don't know.
Right.
Well,
the way the original Data API would do that is it would return a URL.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Jansen just mentioned in the group chat that he could answer that. Paul, if you want to.
You want to?
Yeah. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, we can.
Cool. Yeah. We've been looking at this for container data, and it does return a URL, but it comes back with an IP address of 127.0.0.1. Okay. So if all you have to do is substitute it for the real host name of the server, and you get a link that will allow you to download or view whatever was in that container.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Thank you. That works. That would work great.
Very cool. Well, we're kind of seeing whether we can use it with a web interface so that we can actually create a PDF, stick it in a container, and then get a link by running that server side to get the URL.
Yeah. Have you done a lot of testing with that as far as how static the URLs are for them, or?
No, it's early days. We did the first proof of concept that it works, and actually we want to use it for stuff that won't be long standing, shall we say. Like if someone wants a report, then we can run the report on the server and produce a PDF, stick it in the container, and send them the link, and they can download it. So, no, not a lot of testing, just the fact that we've been able to make it work so far.
Okay. The original ones that I was doing with that were just photos being sent via the Twilio SMS API. So the links that the original Data API gave were, I think, single session links. So as soon as the data was consumed one time, it was the links would go dead, which is great if you're trying to pull a picture out of your FileMaker database and you only want to be able to see it the one time. But I don't know how long those links last. I haven't done a lot of testing with them because I consume them right away and I'm done. I wonder whether or not they work.
I can reload the link and it still works. So
yeah.
It's not a one-time only thing.
Right.
So.
Right. Very cool.
But it ends up with the URL being, the streaming _ SSL, and then a whole load of unique ID stuff. That's a fairly long character string.
Got a RC embedder processor or something like that.
.jpeg at the end, $RC type equals embedded RC file processor and redirect.
Right.
But if it works, it's cool, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. So one trick that I've learned with that too is sometimes an API that will want to consume that data, if it hits a link like that, it needs a flag that's -L, $L, in order to read what's actually at that website. So if you're trying to programmatically send something via API, sometimes throwing a flag in the end will help with that.
Okay. What is that? Just a -L chucked on the end? Ooh.
Yeah, just dash and $L.
I should write that down.
Yeah. It's just one of those things that comes with banging your head against the wall a couple of times in order to figure it out. But
Isn't that how we make all our best discoveries? Yeah.
Right. Right. You throw yourself at the wall until there's a U-shaped hole in the wall. Right. So one other question that I had was about portal data. What happens when you try to look up something on a layout that's got a portal on it? Does it show all the portal data for each record for each time, or I wonder how it nests all that into the, can you put limits on it like you can with a number of records, or does it just send you back an absolutely massive blob of JSON?
You think you're going to get and I'm not sure. I haven't tested that. I didn't do much of the testing here with the portal data.
Yeah.
But I think it's working just like a find. So it's going to find your list, all your records, and then it's going to return all of the data for those records. So if you have 100 records and you've got a portal on there that averages 50 child records for each record, you're going to get 5,000 portal rows of JSON back. You know what I mean? Hi.
I think this is Beth. Beth. That did that the thing you demoed there. I think I have my client working on the actual work on this stuff now, just using the stuff I designed. But I believe that the portal data returns whatever the portal is set to show. That's the number of records that you get back. I believe it limits it by that because I saw.
Oh, that would be good. So yeah, if the portals on the layout, the portals show 5 rows, it doesn't.
Yeah, I don't want to test it personally myself, but I saw chatter between her and Steve that she was changing limits on stuff, and I'm pretty sure it was just a visible thing on the layout.
So if you wanted to show more child records, you'd have to make a really big portal, right?
Yeah, but you don't have to make it really show anything. You can make it really tiny on your layout.
Oh, that's true. You make it really tiny and say 200 rows. Okay.
Right.
You might just want 1 or 2 of the records out of the portal. Or you might want to sort it, like I said, a way to do a second sort into another table. Also, that makes more sense for that layout.response, right? So it has context, but sometimes you want to read the response from a different layout. That might go back to that idea with, I have a portal that I'm using for a user. He might want 15 records on the page in the portal, but for the API, you might only want 1 or 2. Right?
Beth, can you do a limit on the portal, or is there a limit for the portal also, or is it just a limit for the records?
The limit is for the records, but I'm thinking maybe the way you have it designed on the layout is going to limit what you get back. But I was going to see if I can bring up the file and see what she did on that layout, because I didn't work on that piece.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of a reason that you would be able to, or that you would want to run a script from this step. And I can't think of one. Like, why wouldn't you just run the script and, you know, it just doesn't make any sense. Then again, I can't, like half the time I can't get my scripts to run from, you know, by writing JavaScript and then calling it from outside FileMaker, right? I never got that script, or the, for some reason I never got the data API to cooperate with that for me. I ended up doing a query and running a script afterward. But can anybody think of a reason that you would want to run a script from inside this thing?
Yeah. Well, you can, this will run scripts on server. The data API won't run a script on server, right? But this will, right? Right, Beth? Isn't that what you were telling me?
Yeah, so on this
PSOS.
yeah, on this Miami project, the scripts are being initiated from the website, which uses the regular FileMaker Data API on the server. It calls scripts inside of FileMaker, and then to do certain actions, like if I needed to use the file manipulation steps and stuff like that, those are not compatible with a script running from the data API. But if you're in the data API, you can call a script on server, oddly. And then you get actions that are compatible with perform script on server. So on some of these things where I needed to do some stuff that's not compatible with the data API, really the website is calling a wrapper script, and then I do a perform script on server from there to do the other stuff. It was it kind of hurt your head to think about. Luckily, somebody had answered that question on the FileMaker community.
Just your standard indirection FileMaker workaround.
Yeah, it's a little crazy. And then there's what else? Oh, when someone mentioned that that you could get container data out of this call with the Execute FileMaker Data API, there's another piece of this application where we need to show them a finished PDF that they can save or print or whatever, or email it to them and stuff. And I didn't even think about passing that back through this mechanism. It would be interesting to see if we can. But so what we're doing is we're saving it off to the desktop, then temporarily throwing it into a global container, and then I'm pushing it over to S3. But maybe we wouldn't have had to do that S3 stuff if it worked directly. So that's an interesting thing to think about.
Paul mentioned in the chat about the layout.response, and Paul, I couldn't find anybody who could talk to that very much. Do you want to tell us what you know?
Well, I mean, only that it seems quite bizarre, doesn't it? That if you try and create that using the FileMaker JSON set element command, you get a nested object rather than an object called layout response. So
are you creating layout response? Or are you declaring it in the call? I'm not.
But it's whether you need it or not is debatable. But the fact that it's so difficult to actually create it using FileMaker's JSON functions.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, that was the point I was making. Is that it's actually rather challenging, isn't it?
You have to send that as JSON, not just a layout name. Is that?
Yeah. Well, there was a discussion on the Geist article about the data API script step, and we just kind of, I don't know, hacked it around a bit and came up with the least messy way of creating that JSON element, I suppose. So
it's because of the dot.
Yeah, because of the dot, basically, yes.
Because it tries to nest it rather than
it tries to nest it. So
I see.
So this is what I put. I'll just put in the chat the way we resolved it. Rather than just create it manually by a text string and then put it in. This was a kind of a.
This is down. I remember that this is you down here.
Yeah, that's me down there. Yeah.
Okay.
So But I didn't make that up myself. I just kind of evolved it from what other people were doing. So yeah, it's this one. That's it here. This one that's at the top of your screen now. Yeah.
Okay.
So this top row is where we create the layout response. So and we're actually creating a raw bit of JSON there, and then everything else gets added to it. But it does mean you can use a single JSON set element command to build your query, rather than having to hack the block of JSON afterwards.
Okay. Yeah.
Obviously, it has to be the first thing because it overwrites everything in the JSON object. That's the one gotcha. You have to do that bit first.
And why do you need the layout.response? I mean, you have the layout.
Whether you do or not is a question. I just wanted, I guess it was the challenge, wasn't it? You know, it's one of the things that you can use, and FileMaker haven't made it easy for us. Sorry, Claris haven't made it easy for us to do. So what's the, it's one of those things that you just kind of, rather than do real work, you try and find out the tidiest way of getting around a limitation.
Yeah, I think most people are just leaving it blank.
Yeah. Yeah, I think most of the time for most stuff, that's probably the best option.
I got you. Okay, thank you.
Did they have metadata as part of the data API in 18, or is that new for 19?
No, that was new in 19. In fact, a couple of blogs I read said like, oh, and they included the metadata, which you don't even get in the data API, but it turns out that they added that to the data API also in 19.
Hmm.
So if you go to, let's see, where data API guide. So the metadata, it's in here.
Mm-hmm.
I just lost it. I just closed it. Metadata, get metadata. So it's in here. I tried to do scripts, and I got an error. So, just scripts.
Right.
I tried value list too, and it gave me an error. But it turns out value list isn't one of the ones they list here. This database names, which you don't need database names. You only can use the database you're in. But script names, layout names, and the layout metadata.
Yeah.
Should be tables too. I think maybe that's under database.
Can you change any of the metadata from the API?
Not the execute from this API, from the real data API. I don't know what we call it real. From the data API or the script step?
Well, I just wondered whether or not you could change a layout from the data API.
I don't know. I don't think so. I think you're just retrieving data.
Yeah.
It just says, retrieving the following metadata. I think you're just retrieving data.
Right.
And you can't, from the script step, you can't change anything. It's all retrieving at this point. I think the future will have a lot more. You'll be able to do a lot more with it, actually change things. But right now, the script step is just retrieving data or metadata.
Yeah. Man, the script step is pretty nice though, with being able to pull information out much more quickly. I kludged together a way to do this with the data API in April before they released FM19, and you had to store your credentials for the data API as in the script or somewhere else, and then basically self-reference as if you're just making an outside data API call. And the script's not that long, but it was just a whole lot of really nasty parsing. So it can be done. It's just way, way easier to do this way.
Well, I did actually add a metadata script to this. Run it. And then the data viewer, you see, here's it formatted. So I ran it on the layout that I was using for my return. And it's just got those 6 fields.
Mm-hmm.
The response field metadata, here are my 6 fields. There's first name, last name, phone company, address, city. Here's the value list. So the address city actually has a drop-down list of all the 2-digit state names.
Mm-hmm.
So that's showing here. So this is still in this, well, it should be still for the state code. Yeah, the value list for the state codes. And if I do this, let's try it. I'm going to close this. So if I do this for contact, I think that's the original layout that came with it. Run that. So this is got a lot more fields. And different value lists. Language.
Croatian.
So let me show you. So let's this is what happened like when I tried to do scripts. So action. Oops. Scripts. Save that, run it. See, it gives me a code 3 unsupported key.
Scripts.
And you know that it would seem to me that this is saying that you can get scripts, right?
Yeah, I think they only exposed certain things to the internal one.
Well, considering the only documentation is the external one, that makes it a little hard. I'm scratching my head. I think one of the blog posts I read said you can do scripts, but
Yeah,
and I tried value lists, and it's funny, it gave me a different error, but it didn't work either. So yeah, so it's like Paul found out. It's a little bit of trial and error. Try stuff out, see what works. But it's real easy to do. There's only one table. Oh, there are 2 tables, and that's it. It's a pretty simple database. Does anybody have anything else they want to ask?
Hey, Phil, it's Steve. I do remember that Jeremy Brown, when he was showing this at his Engage session, was basically saying that that Geist is using it for add-ons. So when they're bringing things in, it's reading the metadata from the context of the layout you're bringing it into, so it can self-populate with field references. So that would be a good video if people are interested in that. Look for that from Engage.
Was that one of the on-demand sessions?
No, it was one of the.
Oh, on the
it was on the day of. Yeah.
Okay, I don't remember that. I saw almost all of them.
Yeah, it was right after the intro. It was his JavaScript session.
Okay.
If you want, I can show my my little hack, or we
can
to break.
Yeah. Okay, stop sharing. I don't know if you can share, or if I need to make you a host. Do you have a share button?
I do. Let's see. Okay, can you still hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
So hear you and I see your screen.
All right. There was an article here on One More Thing, which was talking about using the Execute FileMaker Data API to retrieve lists of IDs. And I have a use case for that in one of my clients. I have something where I have kind of a persistent list that shows available found sets for go-to-related record steps. And so the way that I was doing that before was using Execute SQL commands, but they're pretty slow on the client. So I was pushing them up to a perform script on server and then returning results. And I've just kind of done an A/B test with this to see if the data API will yield any faster results. And with the size of data that I have, it's really about the same, but it was just easier to implement. And just because this file has private data, I just replicated this in using a set of data from Kaggle. I grabbed a set of historical avocado prices, and so this file has, it's not a huge amount of records. There's 18,000 records, and I just built a simple query card, which just has 3 different variables, and those variables then basically run the data API to get a list of found IDs, and then set a field, and then do a go to related record. And the gist of this trick is really pretty simple, and it's just in the layout that you're using, have a summary field, field that's a list of IDs, and then only retrieve 1 record, and just pull out that field.
Right.
So super easy. That was
You
it.
need to have the found set though, right? So you
yeah. So I'm using the
found
queries
set and then grab a first set,
but I'm not actually doing anything with the JSON that comes back from the found set, and I don't need to actually get. Again, I only need 1 result if I have a summary field there. So for this case, that's nice.
I was reading a lot of people are putting the 1 summary field in all their, it's a default field in all their tables is a get list of IDs.
Yeah.
Get list of primary key IDs, primary keys. And yeah, I'm using that all over the place.
And then one other little hack, actually was getting this from, I think it was from Mike Duncan. A lot of times doing all the escapes that you need to do for quotation marks is rife with errors. So doing insert text and leaving all the quotation marks intact saves you from doing all that escaping.
Well,
so,
and not only that, insert text is much faster if you've got big chunks of text.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if you noticed, but like when the carafe, that's how they do like the big carafe libraries. They're basically injecting the whole library in there. The thing is, inserts have a character limit of 35,000 characters.
Yeah.
So it takes like 7 steps. You can append. So they just keep insert till they've got their million, few 100,000 characters in their whole thing. Build it that way, but it's much faster than setting variables.
And then the other hack with this I'm doing just for my own sanity for readability, I'm kind of leaving all of my criteria as kind of a placeholder starter criteria, and then I'm subbing in using substitution to get my field values, so that I'm not having to deal with variables inside of the quoted inserted text. So.
Oh, that's how you did that. Yeah, I was trying to use insert, but with variable or
so just do the insert and then immediately
you can't do it.
Substitute right after it. So I'm basically building the individual things that might be in a query payload, and then I'm building the query payload, and then I'm substituting in the query payload into the query and running it. So pretty quick.
Okay. And can you show that again? I wanted to see the query. Can you go back to that?
Yeah.
Insert variable query. Is that?
Then the query payload is just where I have a list of what actually is being used. So it can vary. If I don't fill the criteria, it's just going to use I just hacked this together this morning. So it's just either give me the value that you've put into your pull down, or just find content.
What's the first line, the insert text line? Net 42. I'm sorry. No, line 42.
Okay.
So you're doing just 1. So you're saying.
Yeah. And then I just have kind of a placeholder. I'm just using this naming convention for any time I'm going to be substituting in, just asterisk.
Okay.
Post.
You have a sort in there?
I don't need the sort.
Yeah, and one thing I read is that the sort can really slow it down.
Yeah.
So if you don't, I would take it out if you don't need it.
Yeah, actually, we should copy the sort from the other solution. Where I did need the sort, I just didn't pull it out.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I have another question, but we can put that to the back half.
I think we're on the back half. So,
just a general question. I've also been using the regular data API to kind of do. Do you remember when Charles was in and was detailing how he was using, I think it was REST-FM to do logs, script logs and whatnot? I've been using the data API to do access logs. So logging, application version, platform version, and whatnot for clients. And I'm doing that using the regular data API. And one of the things that I like about it is when you post it, you don't have to unpack it at the other end. And one of the things when you're doing things to pack a chunk of JSON and then bringing it to another context and unpacking the JSON, you have to take it back out into variables, or you can do kind of a long, get JSON get element and then the get script parameter and then the name of the value. But when you're using the data API and using a post command, it's just directly creating the record because you're using the name of the field in that layout. So the thing I'm trying to get my head around is with the quotas that we have for the data API per user, I would think that there would be a lot of times where the creation of related records could be done using the data API and kind of reduce the need to do those unpacking scripts to take the file to the other context and unpack it and do all the set fields. Does that track?
I don't think I can help you. Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
Steve, I think you are living in the year 3020, and we're all still in 2020. You've gone far beyond where we can help you.
Well, I'll show you the script for that.
Yeah.
What are we doing here? Okay, so basically when somebody opens this file,
Mm-hmm.
I'm making a JSON payload.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to run this FileMaker Data API script. Which, if I haven't used it, it's going to go get new credentials. If I have used it recently, it'll know that my credentials are still valid. And then it's going to go post it. And once it's posted, it's done. So, so I don't have to go in and go to the other context and.
Right.
Steve, so the reason you're doing this as the data API post versus just a PSOS is why?
No particular reason. I was just experimenting with it.
Just experimenting.
Trying to figure out if there was a use case, and just because if all you need to do is create a payload and throw it to the Execute FileMaker Data API, throw it to a post and not have to unpack, it just seems less script to maintain.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, the records I think will get created a lot faster too.
Yeah.
You creating one record at a time and having to deal with writing 7 or 8 variables. So there's certain things that the data API is just a lot faster at. I think that is one of them.
So I remember Charles was just logging kind of anytime anybody ran a script or added a record and stuff like that. So I'm not quite as retentive on logging, but things like just platform information, and if somebody opts out to do something that you are encouraging them to do, but they chose not to, it's nice to log that they made that choice. So those are just the use cases that I have for this, where I'm not actually leaving the layout and going over and doing something with a freeze window and creating a record and then getting back to my context. I'm just saying, Data API, go do this for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I understand what you're saying now. That's pretty slick. Mm-hmm. With one call, you send it away and you're done.
Yeah.
You don't have to process it from there or process it from here. You just send it. Yeah.
Right. So I'm just trying to figure out, with the amount of traffic, I don't think it's ever going to get me anywhere near any of my quotas.
It's 2 gigs per user. Yeah, I don't think.
Right.
Well, that's only.
Well, and it's going in, right?
Yeah,
it's only outbound.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's free.
So there's no cost. Great.
It's a free lunch. You found a free lunch.
All right. I'm going to stop my screen share.
I have actually one thing to show you, which you may or may not be aware of. But for this, one thing you have to be aware of, so this is when I sent this to the web viewer to use JavaScript in the web viewer. When you send JSON to JavaScript like this, it doesn't come in as JSON. It comes in as a string. So use this function here. Take the input.
We're not seeing your screen, Bill.
Oh, that would be helpful, wouldn't it? Here we go. Okay, so what I was saying was, when you send this to the web viewer, so your JavaScript can parse it out. Mm-hmm. When it gets to the JavaScript in here, you're sending an input. It's not JSON anymore, even though if you sent JSON, it gets sent as a string. So you need to do this JSON.parse to make it into JSON. So I'm just taking input and to make this input JSON. And when you send it back out, you have to do the same thing. If you just return your results, it looks like JSON, but when it gets returned from JavaScript, it's a string. So you have to do stringify. So in my result, which looked fine, but it doesn't get back to FileMaker fine unless you stringify it. When you get it back, it just says quote slash, quote slash, quote slash, quote slash. But if you put the stringify in front of it, then it comes back as JSON.
Right.
So you have to remember both those.
Some of the APIs that you do this same kind of thing with will actually send things as queries too. And then you'll have to use a package in order to kind of unpack that string. That's the query string. There is a node package called query string that does that I've used before. I don't know. Has anybody had any experience with trying to put node packages into the web viewers? Is that something that we can even do? What do you do for dependencies on these things?
I haven't done that.
Okay.
There's a good chance Wim has done it, or if you can do it.
Yeah.
He does a lot of work with Node.js.
And try to pick his brain on that a little bit.
Yeah, he might be able to suggest something or tell you what works.
Mm-hmm. It occurs to me that the method of using the original data API, now that it has the metadata attached to it, may be the only way that you can get that list of scripts that you were looking for. Kind of the extra step of, that one.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just surprised it doesn't work from the script step.
Yeah.
Seems like it. Well, I don't know.
Still, it's like a hybrid of the thing that Steve just showed, and then using that to get what you were looking for there with the scripts.
So there's about 10 minutes left, 9 minutes left. Does anybody have any suggestions for next meeting?
I just wanted to jump. This is Chris Moore. I just wanted to jump in for a second. Several years ago, Matt Petrowski did. I think he was actually doing in animated splash screen and stuff like that. But the technique he used there would address the last question that just came up, which is how do you, sort of encapsulate dependencies and have the code on the layout. And his solution was just to put text blobs on his layout. He had conditional hides on them because by his reckoning, the layout hidden object math fired first. So it was the quickest way to get that to evaluate and get the FileMaker calculation engine to see it. And so then he would just use get layout object attributes and grab the content of those text objects. And he stuck all his dependencies in there, and they were just sitting off in no man's land on the layout. And then he had a web viewer referencing them and swapping them in.
Very cool.
I actually did that too a long time ago. I forgot about that. I would load JavaScript libraries that way. Just put them in a text blob and then just call the get layout attribute and load it into a variable.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
All right. Well, keep your eyes peeled for the meetup page and see what gets updated there. And I'll try to come up with something. And I'm probably going to go to like one meeting a month in October, November, December. Unless I can like find some, people to start filling in our meeting with material. But also things are getting busy. So thanks everybody for coming. Thank you for coming once again, and really appreciate having these meetings and showing things and talking about them. And I'll see you in a couple weeks.